When we speak about children of war, documentary footage from World War II usually comes to mind. We didn't know where exactly we were taken. Only when they saw tall towers, barbed wire, barracks and Nazi guards with angry dogs, everything became clear. It was a concentration camp. Children were lying on bare bunks. There was a terrible smell everywhere, the stench of death. The scariest thing for me was when they started tattooing a number on my arm. From that moment on, I no longer had not only my parents, toys, normal food, but even my own name and surname. According to eyewitnesses, such was the life of children in Auschwitz extermination camp. 77 years have passed since then. It seems that humanity has recovered and developed countermeasures to deal with crimes against humanity and against children. For this purpose, a number of conventions and agreements were signed and international organizations were created. Never again, we repeat. But this is 2022 and these are Ukrainian children. Gangs of Russians invaded the territory of a sovereign country to exterminate the Ukrainian people. Therefore, children are killed, raped, kidnapped from their living parents and forcibly taken to the territory of foreign country. During the war, children perceive a lot more than what adults think they do. Children see, understand and realize everything. For a newborn child, a separation from parents is similar to death. Before the war, more than 7.5 million children lived in Ukraine. A year after the Russian invasion, this number was reduced by half. To save their lives from Russians, mothers of millions of children have been forced to take them to Europe. Nearly 1,000 Ukrainian children have been wounded. Hundreds are missing. Hundreds have been killed. The more we learn about those who were buried in the occupied territory, the larger number of names in this list may become, unfortunately. Reading it is scary. Year of birth, place of residence, circumstances of death, all of them would be alive now if the only one person in Moscow had not caused this disaster. Murders, wounds, forced adoptions, kidnapping and deportation of children is nothing but acts of genocide. Russians absolutely do not care which children they will kidnap. Very young children, older children, children with disabilities, children with parents, without parents or wounded. They do not care, they just want to do everything possible so Ukraine loses its treasure, its gene pool. Children are not only the treasure of the nation. For the occupying country, they are a real social force that, together with adults, will determine both the present and the future of the planet. A great happiness is to have children. This is one of the life and existing purposes. This instinct is very powerful. It prompts people to do certain actions. Those are the words of the president of the aggressor country, who loves children's audiences very much and never ignores them with his attention, sometimes a strange one. Sweet little children. And those are the actions of Russian militaries in Ukraine. On March 9, 2022, several aerial bombs were dropped on the maternity hospital in Mariupol. I have cried only once during the war. And it was a big breakdown. That was exactly the day and the moment when I learned about the shelling of the Mariupol maternity hospital. I could not help myself. I literally was wailing, just wailing. Just in a week, the entire world shuddered with terror when it saw the footage of Russian bombs falling on Mariupol Drama Theater, near which the word "children" was written with big capital letters. According to the Associated Press news agency, more than 600 people died during that airstrike. Among them, there were children who were hiding in the shelter. We are trying not to get nervous during the strikes. Everything is shaken here. That was Mariupol before the Russian invasion. These complete ruins is also Mariupol after the atrocities committed by the Russians. To hide their crimes once they occupied the city, they rapidly started repairing and building houses. But the drama theater, or what's left of it, was simply razed to the ground. The main Nazi ideologist of the genocide and Germanization policy was Himmler. According to his plan, Slavic people had to be deprived of statehood, their territories to be cleared for Germans or turned into a desert zone. Those who would not resist and obey were decided to be sent for re-education and Germanization. What other nation claims for themselves in terms of good blood and racial strength, we want to take for ourselves if necessary, even though the means of kidnapping children and raising them with us, said Himmler. Doesn't this remind you of anything? Welcome to Moscow, we have been waiting for you. In the evil empire, the Soviet Union family separation was also practiced. Children of the so-called enemies of the people were forced to publicly disown their parents. When persons are separated from their family, being on their own, it is easy to control them. They will be grateful to the government for accepting them. They will be loyal, ready to do anything. This is why they are doing this to children now, separating them from their parents to make them devoted slaves so they serve for the goods of Russia. You won't believe it, but they are not hiding their crimes in the Russian Federation. On the contrary, they turned them into a source of pride. They publicly announced that more than 700,000 children have already been taken from Ukraine to the territory of the occupying country. 721,000. These are numbers published in open sources by the Russian Federation. They say that they have already evacuated 721,000 Ukrainian children, and they usually present it as a noble act, as saving children, but everyone, Ukraine and the entire world community, perfectly understand that this is nothing but deportation and forced displacement. On August 12, 1949, all the countries of the world signed the First Geneva Convention. Russia has also ratified this international treaty, which strictly prohibits individual or mass forcible transfers, as well as deportations of protected persons from occupied territory to the territory of the occupying power. But time after time, Russia demonstrates to the whole world that any agreement and arrangement with it are null and void. Violating the norms of international law and committing terrible crimes, Russia is only cynically flaunting that while lying outright, time after time. Sweet little children. We brought a group of 30 children from Mariupol who were found in basements. They were abandoned by their adoptive parents, who evacuated without them. In fact, they were left in such a difficult situation. This is what Maria Lvova-Belova, who was appointed by Putin to the position of Commissioner for Children's Rights, says. She is a person who was included in the sanctions list by the governments of the USA, Great Britain, Australia, Canada, and the countries of the European Union, precisely because of the illegal and forced removal of children from Ukraine. She is lying. The first falsehood is that children were abandoned. The second one is about the blackmail related to close relatives, in particular to younger siblings. Older children are told that if they wouldn't get adopted, then their siblings wouldn't get adopted either. Obviously, as any children are wanting the best for their siblings, most of them agreed. My husband, our 4 children, and I lived in a village in Vovchansk district, right on the border with Russia. During the occupation, we tried 5 times to leave for the territory controlled by Ukraine, but the stories that the convoys of civilians were shot stopped us. In the summer, a teacher from Vovchansk persuaded me to send my 20-year-old daughter on vacation. Since our Ukrainian army returned to the village, I have been trying to get my daughter back, but Russians won't return her. This is only one of many thousands of stories about how Ukrainian children ended up in Russia. One of the signs of genocide is the creation of conditions under which life is impossible. So in fact, the Russians have created such conditions in certain territories under which life is simply impossible. Generally, parents have no other options but to give their children away if they believe that the child would be returned in a month. In the occupied territories, people simply have no choice. Every manifestation and disagreement, disobedience or resistance means only one thing: torture and death. We saw the bottom in Kherson. In one of the torture chambers, we saw a separate cell where children were incarcerated. According to the testimony of people who were captured there, they say, "We know that our Ukrainian children are next to us. Even the occupiers themselves confirmed, yes, there is a children's cell. It is the same dump room. They only threw 3 sleeping pads, very thin ones, and they called it children's cell." As it was established, the children were given water every other day, kept practically without food, and psychological pressure was also used. Children were told their parents had abandoned them and would not return. A 14-year-old boy was captured only for taking pictures of broken Russian equipment. He was thrown into the prison chamber and tortured. The cruel violence and abuse in Izium were not random incidents, said Belki Swile, senior crisis and conflict researcher at Human Rights Watch. Multiple victims shared credible accounts with us of similar experiences of torture during interrogation in facilities under the Russian forces or their subordinates, control indicating that this treatment was part of a policy and plan. The atrocities of the Russians seem to know no bounds. In Ukraine, June 1st is the day of remembrance of children who died as a result of armed Russian aggression. The First Lady and the ambassadors of the countries in Ukraine hung bells on the very ancient linden tree of St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev as a sign that those children have turned into angelic voices and now they will sound through those bells. There was a father, a policeman from Mykolaiv region. He lost his entire family. They all were shot at the checkpoint. Russians fired them very defiantly, seeing that the car was full of people, his father and mother, his wife and 2 children, a 9-year-old girl, Sofia, and a newborn few-months-old boy. The children did not die immediately. They were in agony for another 2 hours, wheezing and crying. The relatives asked to let them get into the car to take their children and save them, but the Russians allowed the relatives into the car only after 2 hours. Unfortunately, it was impossible to save the children by then. Parents of children who were taken to Russia on a pretext of vacation face lies every time. One of the mothers shared, "When I finally got a chance to speak to my son on the phone, he was crying all the time because he thought we would never see each other again. In the camp at Seacoast, he was told that here at home Ukrainian soldiers shoot everyone who leaves house. In murder, they do not abuse or beat them, they intentionally break their mind." When we brought them to the territory of the Moscow region so they would recover a bit, they spoke negatively about our president, said nasty things, sang the anthem of Ukraine and used to say glory to Ukraine, etc. But a little time passed. These children ended up in foster families in the Moscow region. One of the boys ended up in my family. And now I can see the integration begins to take place. These children will be Russified and militarized in a different way. Thanks to the Russian education system, first of all, they will have extra classes of Russian language, since according to the statement of the Russian officials, Ukrainian children in the occupied territories do not speak Russian well. They spread the myth that the Russian-speaking population is being oppressed here, but it turns out that the Russian-speaking population in Ukraine is very small. On December 12, 1935, by the personal decree of Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, the organization Lebensborn, literally fount of life, was created in Germany. I believe that our blood is the best blood in the world, it will conquer the universe, and after several countries it will remain the best, Himmler believed. Women and Lebensborn gave birth to children not for themselves, but for the Führer. During World War II, the Nazis kidnapped 250,000 children from the occupied territories to raise them as loyal slaves. Very few of them returned home. I don't know why I was left alive. I was already 10 years old, I had brown eyes and brown hair, which is not exactly an Aryan appearance. Children who did not look like Aryans at all were transported to concentration camps, where they often died. After the shelter, which belonged to Lebensborn, I was adopted to a German family. I was strictly forbidden to speak the native Czech language. That was the childhood reminiscence of Ingeborg Schiller, a victim of Nazi experiments. The woman never learned her real name or surname. Now this is the 21st century. This is another camp where kidnapped Ukrainian children were taken for re-education in summer. First, the enemy gets defined. This is our enemy and he is bad. Second, the friends gets defined. This is your friend, he may give you candy. All this gets supported emotionally. Different emotions are suggested for each age, starting with entertaining songs about our good friends and our bad enemy, ending with those performances that we saw in Russian kindergartens and schools, where children march in the shape of the letter Z and demonstrate all those symbols. By the way, using the symbols uniform and any signs that support this new idea is the next step. When the Russian government began the experiments on Ukrainian children, Russians condemned such actions. You can't separate mother and child, you can't deliberately make these children orphans. Unbearable trials have already fallen on them. What mercy do we show to the children of DPR and LPR? But why the officials aren't concerned about children who live in inhumane conditions in the Syrian Al-Hawl refugee camp? For the first year, people are beginning to return mothers and children from Syrian concentration camps. For the first year. Such comments were questioning a Russian slogan, "We don't leave our people behind," but those who disagree had to shut up quickly. Today the President signed the decree on the simplified procedure for granting Russian citizenship to orphans from the DPR, LPR and Ukraine. It will significantly facilitate issues of guardianship and trustship, as well as provide them with additional social guarantees. Ukraine has already submitted to the International Court collected facts of the first deportation of young Ukrainians. We draw the attention of all international leaders and we demand a separate proceeding about forced deportation of children to be started at the level of international tribunal. Public speeches of Russian officials are in fact confessions. She actually admits that the children could have been taken out in accordance with the norms of international law to the territory of Ukraine, and Ukraine had all the resources to transport them safely, but they kidnapped the children. Contrary to the requirements of international law norms, not a single request from Russia for the relevant transfer was submitted to the competent authorities of Ukraine. Neither UNICEF nor the Committee of the Red Cross is involved in this process. Moreover, children are taken out of the occupied territories under protection of the Russian military or even by planes belonging to the Ministry of Defense. This is forced displacement of children. This is deportation of children accompanied by armed people in a special transport, which allows no escape, even if you'd want to escape, even if you are old enough, conscious enough to do it. The kidnapped children get taken to all the regions of Russia. There are enough people wanting to adopt them. In addition to the system of benefits and the provision of certain funds, there are also other incentives for the adoption. The return of the honorary title Mother Heroine and the order Parental Glory to stimulate adoption smells Sovietish. Remarkably, for some reason, Putin restored all these various titles precisely in June 2022. Why is that? By the way, the image of an exemplary mother created by propaganda for its ombudsman is far from perfect. She has no higher education. Lvova Belova's specialty is an orchestra conductor. She worked as a guitar teacher. Later, she married a programmer who later became a priest. At the age of 21, Lvova-Belova gave birth to her first child, and at the age of 28, she adopted 4 at once. Formally, it is a Russian analog of Lebensborn. Please pay attention to the personality of Lvova-Belova. She has taken a Ukrainian boy from Mariupol into her family in violation of even the norms of Russian law. This is important information because Lvova-Belova is a mother of many, not only her biological children. In total, she has 23 children under various forms of this guardianship, like temporary fostering, guardianship, or patronage, including children with disabilities who do not live in her family, not specifically in her house, but in a special institution. In fact, it's just some kind of factory, whatever you want to call it. It sounds scary, but these are special parents. Putin's henchwoman does not hide what is happening in her family. I have a daughter. When she turned 18, she packed her bag and left. We haven't spoken for 3 years. Of course, there was no violence in our family, no harshness or anything. She left because there were a complicated relationship between her and adopted children. She believed we loved her less than the other children. She received less care. She left us offended at the age of 18. Ukrainian media started calling Lvova-Belova as a Bloody Mary, but Russian media continued to portray her as an exemplary mother heroine. Of course, she delightfully fulfills all Putin's orders. I saw him. I played with little children and he was sitting with older kids somewhere in the corner. He was looking at me with so much disdain, kind of look at her, come here telling stories, trying to bring goodness and light. Then I thought, okay, so I spotted him back then. Then we started to talk. I decided that he is my child. This is how simple it is. You like a child? Take it. Like in a supermarket. Not a word about searching for relatives or guardians. None. The fate of Filip Golovnya from Mariupol was decided very quickly. The teenager was adopted, a film was made about him, and he was handed out a Russian passport. Putin signed a decree on simplified granting of Russian citizenship to Ukrainian orphans from the occupied territories on May 25, 2022, at the start of the full-scale war. Sweet little children. It is extremely difficult to extract Ukrainian children from the hands of the Russians and return them home. Nobody gets returned. If you think they agree to return or exchange children, you are wrong. I want to say that rescuing and returning every child is the work of a very large government team. This is not 1, 2 or even 3 people, you have to understand. I cannot tell you any details. Each story, each case of return is a special operation of a child rescue. With the beginning of the war, Ukrainian human rights defenders created the Children of War portal. Data on killed, wounded and deported little Ukrainians is updated daily. During the war, children perceive a lot more than adults think they do. Children see, understand and realize everything. Children experience all this painfully. They try to somehow protect themselves, somehow preserve their integrity, so their psychological defense mechanisms get activated. This is the hypercompensation when the child, seeing all this aggression, begins to be aggressive, play cruel games and kill the toy Putin. My client's children draw Putin, hang him, they make such a hangman in their room. This is also a psychological defense. When a child tries to somehow protect himself, such defense mechanisms get turned on. This is harmless enough. He whose fate is to be hanged won't drown. Actions aimed at the total or partial destruction of a national, ethnic, racial or religious group by means of murder, forced transfer of children, forcible resettlement are punishable by imprisonment for a term of 12 to 20 years, or life imprisonment or the death penalty. This is an article of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, which has been in effect since 2009 and which Russian officials violate every day. No one knows what will happen to the children taken out of Ukraine. On November 20, 1945, the International Military Tribunal of Hitler's Nazi began in Nuremberg, Germany. The main accusations were crimes against peace, murders, deportation, abduction of children. It was then that the persecution introduced a new term, genocide, into the official English language. The three main ideologues, Hitler, Goebbels and Himmler, were not at the trial. They had managed to commit suicide. After Nuremberg, the civilized world lived by the principle of never again, and only Russia waited, harboring the hope to repeat again. During World War II, Sachsenhausen Nazi concentration camp had a building marked with the letter Z, where the Nazis executed innocents. We know and remember that indifference kills along with hatred. Indifference and hatred always required both to create evil. That is why it is so important for everyone who values life to show determination when it comes to saving those whom hatred seeks to destroy. So today we remember the global coalition that stopped Nazism. So today we repeat even more strongly than before: never again hate, never again indifference. The more nations of the world overcome indifference, the less space there will be for hatred. Today, the Russian occupiers are exterminating Ukrainians, committing genocide. The name of Russia's criminals are known to the whole world. Hell has been already waiting on them. If Ukrainian mother could, they would tear them to pieces with their own hands. Fathers who are fighting the aggressor in the armed forces would like to erase the murder. But as civilized humans, we want a fair and honest court, an open international tribunal for everyone who has committed a crime. For those who kill and cripple our women and children, destroy our cities and villages, starting with those who give orders to those who execute them. Amen.